Ridley Scott's 1979 film Alien is that rarest of beasts. A popular mainstream horror film that is also enthusiastically appreciated by academics. The narrative sticks to the classic Three Little Pig structure, basically bump off the feckless until the resourceful one defeats the menace, and it is a film rich in genre tropes. Yet Alien is also the work of a director with a distinct grasp of an overall aesthetic that has barely dated in the intervening decades, and has had an enduring impact on the themes and styles of countless science fiction and horror genre films that have come since. Alien is also notable for its gender representation, placing a female with agency, intelligence and initiative at the heart of the narrative at a time when this was unusual in mainstream cinema. Although only Scott's second feature film, many of the characteristics that would go on to define the best of his work are present in Alien. The movement of light and shadow upon the action to enhance the tone of a scene and create movement even if the actors are static within a frame. Bright lights directed through steam or fog to create visual atmosphere. Tonal contrasts in colours to add detail or ambience. Extreme close-ups of characters typically in peril, often directly juxtaposed with extreme wide shots in which the characters are offered a very small part of the shot with a lot going on around them. Jerry Goldsmith's soundtrack is minimalist and eerie, particularly working well with the initially slow-moving camera to build suspense in the opening sequence. The pace of the film shifts from an unhurried first act to a panicked third, with the shot duration inevitably quickening for the later scenes. The sound design complements this, with alien shrieks, use of jump scares and screaming that provide a counterpoint to the mechanical sounds of heavy machinery and chatting computers. As to performance, bickering and overlapping dialogue contrast with long periods of no dialogue at all, useful in conveying the naturalistic environment of a small group stuck at work with a beef against an absent but demanding employer. Most notable in establishing a strong characteristic across Scott's body of work is the intricate detail in the mise-en-scène, particularly in set design. The Nostromo is a work environment as much as a spaceship, and pausing on many shots provides a wealth of detail about the characters and the corporation they work for. Scott is known for completely planning out his films in very detailed sketches shot by shot in advance, and like Scott's next film Blade Runner, which could well be set in the same fictional universe, the ship and alien planet feel like complete and, at least initially, contrasting environments. To achieve this, Scott used two very different visual designers, Ron Cobb and H.R. Giger. Cobb designed the human-made environments that appear logical and realistic, having approached the film as an industrial design challenge. All of his sets and props look as if they have a genuine function, down to the puffs of vapour coming from the spacesuits or safety signs for the airlocks. The interior of the ship was cannibalised from the parts of old planes. This serves to both immerse the audience in a seemingly plausible world and links to a motif that returns in several Scott films, of dystopian capitalist environments that dwarf and oppress the characters he places them in. Gladiator fits that bill just as much as Blade Runner, for example. The true villain is the brutal system that puts wealth and profit above the human life, a theme returned to in the Alien sequels, whether Scott had a hand in them or not. In complete and purposeful visual contrast to Cobb's designs, the surrealist Swiss artist Hans-Rudi Giger was tasked to create the biomechanical aesthetic of the alien xenomorph, though that name is never used in this film. Giger's designs were inspired by the nightmarish paintings of Francis Bacon and give the creature a twisted but convincingly complex biology, from egg to larval state to adult, including a mouth like a nightmarish blend of male and female genitals. The tendons in the jaws are even made of shredded condoms. Close-ups of the mouth, which is clearly a phallic projection, show it excreting lubricant. It really is deeply Freudian, intentionally so, and absolutely horrific. Giger's grotesque fusions of the body, insectoid qualities and technology emphasise the alienness of the creature and its associated environment, as Kane descends into what Barbara Creed calls a monstrous womb, ramping up the invasiveness of the film's body horror. The contrast between the aesthetics of Cobb and Giger is particularly notable in the parallel editing between the scenes of exploration of the crash site and the interiors of the Nostromo shuttle. However, these initially oppositional aesthetics successfully merge when Ash is discovered to be a biomechanical creature himself, with his death throes exposing spurting body fluids as well as plastic and mechanical aspects. This implicitly links the background villainy of the corporation with the alien's body, and perhaps hints at what the corporation might have in mind in future fusing of the two. Body fluids are fetishised, particularly that of Kane and Ash. The viscera of Ash's body may be cloaked in a polite, perhaps even passive-aggressive surface, but once exposed, ultimately creates as much revulsion and horror as the creature. Alien's opening sequence is central in building suspense, tone and aesthetic. The musical score is sparse and it seems to take ages for the different strokes of the 5-letter title to fully appear. The sequence is also devoid of any characters at all for several minutes. Scott has done a few things here. He establishes the narrative pace and the isolation important in placing the crew in peril. The opening shots both oddly recall and counter the opening shots of Star Wars, with the Nostromo looming into view in an intimidating low angle to show its gigantic size. Yet in complete contrast to the way Star Wars places the spectator in the thick of the action and instant immersion in the story, Alien spends long minutes following the slow trajectory through deep space, before long-duration dolly shots take us through the corridors of the ship to finally arrive at a sequence of shot-reverse shot between the ship's computer communicating to an empty spacesuit. This gives us a sense of the geography of the ship and shows off the detailed Ron Cobb design that will later allow Ripley to run through corridors with multiple side shafts. The Nostromo thus takes on the classical role as a labyrinth, with the alien as a minotaur, another creature characterised as a grotesque fusion of body parts. This already gets right to the heart of the id-like nature of the alien mythology and hints at the coming collapse of the distinction between human and alien by the narrative climax. Cold sterility will become hot, sweaty and frantic, and the creature will successfully blend in with the shuttle's interior design. The creature will be the one at home, a parasitic insect infecting a host body. The ship will become humid and sweaty. Second, the film's opening establishes that both the ship, through the computer system known as Mother, and the camera itself are an active presence throughout the film. Human isolation is an illusion. There are other intelligences observing, or will be observing: the alien, the corporation, the cat, the artificial ash, and the spectator. The empty suits left in the pilot seats already hint at non-human life in control. Reverse shots serve as reaction shots to the news of a change in mission. We might be anticipating movement, but of course, typically for Scott, only the light moves. The film's famous tagline may say, "In space no one can hear you scream." The reality is that there are plenty of intelligences that can hear the screaming, they just don't care. This sense of an unseen presence pays off dramatically in multiple ways, including the initial hunt for the alien, conveyed through brief glimpses, audio transmissions, screens distorted through interference, or overheard noises. Finally, the opening sequence arrives at the introduction of the human crew, symbolically born in a sterile environment that stands in pointed contrast to when Kane later gives birth to the alien. The contrast could not be starker. This time, there is tearing of flesh, screaming, gore, and violence, more in line with an actual birth. One notable shot later in the film, where the camera seems to take on an overt subjective character, comes when Ash attacks Ripley. It dollies backward from him, seeming to bump into wind chimes, an act that briefly catches his attention and distracts him from his murderous task. We are positioned as if we are backing away from the scene of a crime. Ash himself is Alien's most fascinating character. For an artificial intelligence, he exhibits a striking range of complex emotions, from passive aggression or suppressed frustration to gloating or furious panic. He is subtly linked to the film's underlying theme, linking parenthood to birth and the offspring as parasite. He is literally close to Mother, both in terms of being a fellow AI and in receipt of privileged information. He is notably seen drinking milk, and even seems to bizarrely imitate the alien's modus operandi in attacking Ripley by pushing a roll-up magazine in her mouth. He admits to admiring the creature. Here, he seems anxious to physically imitate it. This scene's metaphor of bodily invasion and rape is just as unsubtle as Giger's design for the alien's mouthparts, particularly if we assume that the magazine is probably pornographic, based on the evidence of the images that have been pinned to the cubicle wall where the assault takes place. This works to position the creature as the film's co-villain, along with the faceless corporation that has abused its workforce as expendable bodies in search for profit. The ship's working-class characters are considered expendable by an unseen corporate power, the company, that wants to monetize the alien. A Marxist film critic can have a field day. Finally, there is the film's gender representation. The personalities of the human characters are also notably neutral, with no obvious gender hierarchy among them, except for a deference to Mother, of course. Veronica Cartwright's Lambert is often remembered as a traditional screaming female, but that ignores her agency and evident equality in the rest of the film. There is plenty of male screaming too. Barbara Creed's feminist critical framework of the horror film, The Monstrous Feminine, identifies how multiple genre tropes are based on male fear of castration, with body horror typically linked to a fearful warping of the sexualized female. Creed considers the concept of abjection as that which inherently disturbs conventional identity and cultural norms in representations of the female in horror films. Note how Alien makes reproduction seem horrific. The xenomorph's impregnation of male characters is clear in Alien, with a mouth that functions as a reproductive organ. Meanwhile, the alien is an abomination to the patriarchal order and coded as both predatory, fertile male, yet associated with Creed's feminine abjection through the eggs in the alien's monstrous womb. Yet, through sheer victim count, the creature is a terrifying challenge to masculinity, and each of the male characters becomes feminized in its presence. Cain giving birth is the obvious example. Cain's son, says Ash pointedly. Yet Dallas, Brett and Parker all become terrified victims, damsels in distress, with Dallas evidently unable to stand up to Mother in the way that Ripley later will. In a different study of gender in the horror genre, Men, Women and Chainsaws, Carol J. Clover explores the trope of the final girl, the lead female character that has been pursued and hurt by the repressed force represented by the text's monster or killer. Like the third little pig in the story, she finally fights back when the predator comes for her. The final sequence where Ripley has to show initiative to save herself when the others could not is a clear example of this. Ripley's characterization is generally seen as positive by feminist film critics, though whether the climactic sequence has aspects of gratuitous male gaze is debatable. In Clover's reading, the male slasher as an outsider does not have a wholly masculine essence, being by nature outside of the accepted patriarchy, while the final girl is also not wholly feminine because she is usually prudish, intelligent, resourceful, and outside of stereotypical female characteristics, all attributes that could be said to fit Ripley. Until the end of the second act, when the ostensible hero, Captain Dallas, is killed, Ripley's marginalised, ignored when she cautions quarantine, or disrespected by the crew, or just plain out of shot to conceal her importance to the narrative. Meanwhile, the alien too is largely off-screen, an abomination to the patriarchal order and coded as both predatory, fertile male, yet associated with Creed's feminine abjection through the eggs in the alien's monstrous womb. Thus, the final confrontation becomes both a triumph for the terrified female, fending off the physically disgusting abuser, and also a confrontation of how the marginalised are pitted to oppose one another, regardless of gender stereotypes. Having earlier taken on positions of dispassion and logic, Ripley ends the film in a soft-focus Sleeping Beauty or Snow White image, asleep and vulnerable. What are we to read into this? Gender norms restored? Toxic masculinity defeated? Abjections successfully repressed? It's a shame that the Alien sequels flatten any of the rich ambiguity of the ending of the first film by pointedly characterising the company as a patriarchy while establishing the xenomorphs as a matriarchy. The company must have its profit, I suppose, but the spectator is likely to assume that the alien's very nature will ensure that the company's intent to control and profit from it is bound to end in disaster. Patriarchal capitalism attempting to dominate reproduction? That in itself is horrific, but at least the series keeps pointing out that the abject will not be confined and will burst out when it needs to. Alien is one of Ridley Scott's best films as a director, and certainly the preeminent text in the increasingly daft franchise that has never quite managed to repeat its thematic and aesthetic success, despite pointedly spelling out the subtext and demythologizing the mysteries.